So in the last few videos, I've mentioned here and there that most of the common language learning products and methods and techniques that you will hear about out there are actually extremely ineffective and do not have the capacity to take anyone to a true level of fluency in a foreign language. And I've also mentioned in the last video that you don't want to just take my word on this, you actually want to go and confirm this fact for yourself. But I also wanted to end this series on epistemology by talking about why I think this is the case. Because when you think about it, it's quite counterintuitive that most of the advice that you'd find on a certain topic would be so ineffective. For most topics that you want to learn about, you can Google it, maybe you find a subreddit dedicated to this topic, and most of the people on the subreddit are experienced and they will give you good advice. So why is it that when it comes to language learning, this is not the case? Why is so much of the advice out there so ineffective? So I think the most fundamental reason for why this is the case is that it just so happens that the true nature of language acquisition feels very counterintuitive to most people in Western society today. And I think there's two main causes to this. One is that we're told a lot of false things about language acquisition since the time that we are children. For example, we're told that after the age of 13, you lose the ability to acquire a language naturally like a child does, and so you have to learn grammar rules and so on if you want to become able to use it proficiently. Or that if you want to become able to speak a language well, you have to practice speaking a lot, and you want to speak as much as possible from the beginning in order to build your speaking skills. So these things just turn out to be completely false, but because we're told them so much implicitly and explicitly since the time that we are children, over time we've kind of just absorbed these ideas and it has become part of our worldview. And so when we're presented with ideas that go against that, it just seems to be ridiculous and implausible because it already feels like common sense that these ideas, which actually are untrue, happen to be the case, even though we've never really been presented with any hard evidence for them. And the other reason why language acquisition just happens to feel so counterintuitive is that it just so happens that language acquisition differs pretty fundamentally from general skill acquisition. So what I mean when I say general skill acquisition is that there's a lot of commonalities between the way that you learn how to play piano, for example, learn how to do basic math, or learn how to ride a bike, For all these other skills that you want to acquire, you have to actually start practicing the skill, and you become able to do it through actually practicing doing the skill. And so I think a lot of people make the perfectly reasonable assumption that language acquisition should be no exception. It should work the same way. If you want to get good at speaking, then you have to practice actually speaking the language. But it just so happens that language acquisition is fundamentally different than all these other skills that humans tend to go on to acquire. And so this makes the true nature of language acquisition feel counterintuitive. Now, I just wanted to go on a little bit of a tangent right here and explain that just because something feels counterintuitive initially, that's not necessarily a good predictor of whether that thing is true or false. Because when you don't have any direct experience with a certain idea or subject, then it's very likely that your intuition is going to be quite off. And the reason for this is that when you really think about what human intuition is something that evolved over time evolutionarily in order to help humans survive and reproduce within a certain environment. It didn't actually evolve in order to help humans ascertain the true nature of reality. And because of this, human intuition isn't necessarily very good at that, at ascertaining the true nature of reality. And we actually have many examples of science pointing out that what humans intuitively believed for most of human history just happens to be straight up wrong. For example, for a long time, humans believed that disease was caused by, devils or gods or something. And now we know that diseases are actually caused by germs. But this idea is very counterintuitive. The idea that there are just these little tiny things that you can't see or feel that are all over our environment. And that's what causes germs, And it's so counterintuitive to the point that the first person to suggest that people should wash their hands before helping out with childbirth was ridiculed and made fun of, and no one took him seriously. That's how ridiculous the idea sounded to people at the time, Or the idea that the earth is actually round. It's actually quite counterintuitive, right? The sense that the earth is actually this round ball, and no matter where you are on the ball, up still feels like up and down still feels like down, because in reality, all notions of up and down are completely relative, and there's this thing called gravity that sucks you to the ball so that you don't fall off. It's actually very counterintuitive, and it took humans a long time to figure that out. Yet, now, because we have been educated in a certain way, the idea that germs cause disease, that the earth is round, to most people in our current society, it feels very obvious and intuitive because through learning many facts about the world and about science, we've updated our model of reality and we've updated our intuition. And so if you were brought up in a society that happens to not be very enlightened when it comes to language learning, and you don't have a lot of language learning experience yourself, then the chances of your language learning related intuitions being very accurate out of the box is very slim, right? But if you execute a lot of the methods that I talk about on this site and you start to have some direct language learning experience under your belt, you will get to the point where the true nature of language acquisition becomes very obvious, and you see that it really couldn't be any other way. And when you see other more traditional language learners using more traditional methods, it's going to be quite obvious from your point of view why those methods could never possibly actually work. And although I think that this is the most fundamental reason for why there's so much misunderstanding out there about language acquisition, of course there are more surface level reasons, such as a lot of people use ineffective methods and they reach a low level in the language, but due to the Dunning-Kruger effect, which I talked about above, they don't realize how incompetent they still are, and so they start making videos talking about how successful they were and how other people can replicate their success. And then due to the fluency illusion, the viewers of those type of videos don't really realize that the other person probably is at a very low level of the language, and they're not really skeptical about whether what the person is saying is true or not. And of course, we also have the issue that a lot of people who are making language learning products are mostly just interested in making money, and so they're going to tell people what's going to make them the most money, not what's actually going to help people the most. And so a lot of these language learning gurus just tell people what they want to hear. You know, you can get fluent in 3 months. You can be speaking from day one if you only buy my product, and so on and so on. Because the true nature of effective language learning is so counterintuitive, it's very hard to sell people, right? You tell people about it, and then they just think that you're crazy, and so they don't listen. And so, of course, all the common language learning products are going to be telling people what they want to hear so that those people selling the products can make money. Just like how most people who make a New Year's resolution to lose weight and buy a gym membership only go to the gym once or twice before going back to their old ways, most people who decide they want to learn a language and buy a product like Rosetta Stone only use the product once or twice before they completely give up. And so they don't even reach the point of realizing that the method was inefficient, that the product was ineffective. And so they just assume that it was their fault that they didn't learn. I would be willing to bet that the large majority of people who pay hundreds of dollars for something like Rosetta Stone, you know, they only do the first 2 lessons, and so they never get to the point of realizing that they could complete the entire course and pay hundreds of dollars, and they still wouldn't be able to speak the language at all. And so due to all these other surface level factors, the more intuitive sounding methods that really don't work continue to be touted and spread as being common sense about language learning.